Well, welcome everyone. It's mostly Cadre 11 people here, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on introductions of our team. We're just going to go ahead and jump in. So thank you for coming. I really appreciate your attendance at this really challenging time because I know that you're pivoting to bringing kids back into buildings or maybe are just barely into that. So we understand that this is hard to carve out time to come to this and really appreciate it. And we also know that some of our colleagues will be watching a recording of this because they may already have, well, I know that some of them already have kids in the building and are doing intervention groups this afternoon. And so welcome to them as well. So it looks like most people have been able to change your name. So if you haven't yet, go ahead and change your name to include your district name also, so that when we get into our breakout rooms, we'll have a good cross section of districts and schools in each breakout room. Once we send out the presentation, you'll be able to click on this slide that you can see right now to get the resources that we're sharing today. Also, Brad has just put a link to the intervention toolkit in the chat so that you can take a look at it now. Go ahead to the next one, Brad. Okay, today we're going to be talking both about the situation you all are in now, but then also sharing information about intervention review going forward. So we do, like I said, appreciate your commitment both to problem solving your current situation and then continuing to work on implementing and improving your MTSS into the future. So this is kind of a both and kind of community of practice today. Okay, go ahead. Today, we're mostly going to be talking about Tier 2 supports for students, and just a reminder of what we're talking about when we talk about the different tiers of instruction. This is what I lovingly refer to as the Sherbert document that defines the tiers. So remember, these tiers are talking about tiers of support for students, not students themselves. And then for today, talking about Tier 2, in this situation, we'll be talking about looking at supplemental reading supports that we provide to students. So typically, like it says on here, around 20% of the students in your school using an evidence-based program that we know is designed to improve reading, and that we're progress monitoring these students with enough frequency to make good database decisions. And typically that is weekly. It might not have been weekly up till now, given CDL, but going forward, trying to get progress monitoring as much as possible. Okay, go ahead. There you go. So most of you have spent the past couple of years implementing and fine-tuning Tier 2 supports in the work that you do with our project. And then you got to pivot this year and figure out how to deliver intervention programs to students during CDL. And now you have another new challenge. It seems almost like a game show or something, but how to continue intervention supports during the spring. Some of you may be tired of seeing the Ready Schools Safe Learners cover sheet there. Okay, go ahead. So as we talk about intervention placement, we are sort of talking about a new kind of intervention placement now as we bring kids back into the building. It's almost like transitioning from CDL to hybrid is doing intervention placement all over again. And there are some challenges. For example, some teachers might feel like they have more students now that they are seeing them now that they're in the building. They're more concerned about them. So we do need to stick with those decision rules that we have while continuing to support teachers with how to deliver effective, targeted small group instruction during the core reading block, because that also looks different now in person, because it's probably not going to be 6 kids sitting around a kidney table with their teacher like it was a little over a year ago. So how are we supporting both small group instruction during core, but then also the interventions for some students who need even more? Another challenge to intervention support now is that some of the students from one established CDL group might not be the same group of kids who are coming in person at the same time. And it can be challenging with cohorting with students if your intervention group came from separate classrooms and you're bringing them together, depending on the rules in your situation. And then you might have students who have opted to remain in CDL and not come for in-person. So some things that you might need to be considering is Could you possibly have some, will you be having some recorded sessions? Will you be doing some still online? And how could you add some additional practice opportunities, maybe asynchronously for students that they can do when on the days that they're not in school? And even maybe supporting families and caregivers to give some of that practice opportunity with feedback at home. What else? So what do you need to know? We need to know about the rules of cohorting. We need to know which staff are available, and can we expand that pool of staff at all? What locations are available? Can we think outside the box a little bit about where we're providing interventions once we get back in the building, so that we feel safer and can accommodate all the students that we need to? And another fun thing is you may have students who you don't have data on because you haven't been able to capture where they are during CDL, and now they're coming back into the building and you want to get some data on them. So what else is particularly challenging about your situation? When are you going to get started with interventions? We'll be talking about that in some small groups and try to do some problem solving with you, and thinking also about as you're transitioning into a hybrid model and placing kids in interventions, what worked well in CDL? What are those things that we want to continue with so that we're providing the best interventions that we can? Okay, go ahead, Brad. And then intervention review. So do you have confidence in your ability to make that database decisions at this point? What do you have for winter data? What do you have for recent progress monitoring data? Maybe it, like I said, has been hard to capture some of this data during CDL. Can you get some progress monitoring done right away so that you have a little bit better picture of where kids are? Because some kids will have made progress. Will you be able to determine if it's enough to exit them from interventions, or whether you'll need to know whether it's time to intensify those interventions for some or most students? So, and you may need to look at some additional data. You need to look at attendance data, fidelity data, because honestly, have you been able to implement the intervention as it was intended during CDL? Are you going to be able to do that now? So there's lots of questions out there as far as doing intervention review. So really thinking about, what do you know? What do you still need to know? And what kind of changes can we make in our current context? So now we are going to hear from some of the people who are doing the work. So first we're going to hear from Molly. Molly Bell is the RTI coordinator in Philomath, and I'll let her tell a little bit more about what their school is doing right now. Thank you, Molly.
Thanks for having me. So I'm Molly. I'm the RTI specialist HOSA at Philomath Elementary School. And just to give you a little background of PES, we are grades 2 through 5, and we have 4 classrooms at each grade level. And after parent survey, we have 3 classrooms that are back in our building in hybrid. We have a Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday, Friday cohort, which, yeah, is super confusing, but we're rolling with it. And then we have 1 classroom that is staying in CDL at each grade level. Go ahead and switch the slide. And so I wanted to just kind of share the plan that worked for us as we approached hybrid coming, and just how we were able to really gather the data we needed, and then being able to start our intervention groups as soon as we could once we did transition into hybrid. So the week before our hybrid started, I really focused our energy on planning. And we got all the data organized as much as we could to get ready for kind of basically an intervention placement meeting, because we did have kids reshuffled in classrooms and things like that. So we had the data from before and kids that had been at interventions, but we really were having to look at that in our new cohort groups. So that week we kept all of our interventions going and all of our small group support for grades 2 and 3 going as well. And then February 22nd through the 26th was our first week that hybrid started for grades 2 and 3. In our district, we actually did K3 all the same week to start in our 2 buildings. And so that week I had talked to the 2nd and 3rd grade teachers, and we decided that we would not do any interventions or small groups that week, just so they could really establish their classroom routines and expectations. And then that gave me and my instructional assistants time to do our progress monitoring. The kind of crazy thing is, because of all the safety and protocol meetings that had to happen, I wasn't able to do the intervention placement meeting before this week with grades 2 and 3 because they had so many other meetings. And so we had to decide sort of that list of who we wanted to get a data point on based on email and kind of our data from before that we had already been working in small groups and interventions with these kids. So that was a little backwards, but it worked fine. And we actually did the progress monitoring on those students the second day that they were in the building. So like a Tuesday, Thursday cohort, we did their progress monitoring on Thursday. The second graders are brand new to our building, so we wanted to give them at least a day to just kind of adjust. We kept all our interventions going for 4 or 5 during that week. And again, because of the scheduling, I did the planning meeting with grades 4 and 5 that week, because the next week was all of their safety training and protocol meetings. So I just had to be really flexible in fitting that around all the other trainings that those teachers were having to do to get ready to have kids come in the building. And so when we did the intervention planning meeting for 4 or 5, I really, we had the caveat that we were going to come back to any decisions we made after we had the progress monitoring data and look and make sure that they all still made sense. Because again, we're doing things a little bit out of order, just out of necessity there. And then the week 3 of this plan is when we started grades 4 and 5 in hybrid. 4th grade came in Tuesday, Wednesday, and then 5th grade joined Thursday, Friday that week. And so with that, again, the teachers were agreeing with me that we didn't need to do any interventions or small group support that week, that they were just getting their routines down. But I knew I wanted to get progress monitoring data. And in order for that to happen, with the time that we had, I had to grab those kids their very first day in the building. And it went just fine. Like they were ready and flexible, and it worked fine. I made sure to check in with teachers, and I had like a 15-minute block scheduled where they knew we'd be coming to pull those students. And all the progress monitoring went really smoothly across all the grade levels with a little extra communication and planning ahead of time. The other thing is we were able to do our intervention planning meeting on March 1st with grades 2, 3, and that allowed us to actually start interventions that week. And so that was the second week that those kids were in the building. We had the intervention groups going. We had the data from progress monitoring. And so we kind of were able to organize materials and things like that. So we were able to do that meeting on Monday and turn around and start our groups right away on Tuesday. Again, I just have really great staff here and support, and we were able to make that transition really quick after we had that meeting to being ready to do the groups. And then if teachers were ready, we also started our small group reading support for hybrid classrooms. 4 out of the 6 second and third grade teachers wanted that starting that week. A couple teachers needed some more time, whole group, before they were ready to do that. And so again, we were just trying to meet the teachers' needs and really kept that CDL support for those classrooms with Zoom meetings as well that week. Go ahead and switch to the next slide, please. And then week 4, which was last week, we had all interventions going, and it worked, and we've learned a lot with that, and that's going to be my next slide. But we also had all of our small group reading going with second and third grade, including having our support for small group reading in CDL. And then we were trying to still finalize how I can support small group reading for grades 4 and 5. Again, it's trying to find the right fit time-wise and utilizing other instructional assistants in the building. And we're still figuring out some of those schedules. But we were able to also then progress monitor grades 2 and 3. And what happened since we did those on opposite weeks it's kind of created this really nice rotation for us moving forward. Realistically, right now, we're trying to do every 2 weeks, unless it's someone that we know we might need to get more data than that. So we're just going to continue this 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of trade-off of progress monitoring as we move forward. So this week, again, we still have all intervention groups going. We've tried to add in some more small group reading, and I did mark, we're not there yet. My challenge has been trying to finalize instructional assistant schedules across the building as we're learning how long it takes to transition or which students need more behavior support. And so just I'm still communicating with administration about who might be available to match up with a teacher who needs more small group reading support. So that's going to be kind of our ongoing grade. My 4th and 5th grade teachers understand that grades 2, 3 are our priority for small group reading support. And so they've been flexible, but we do have some great instructional assistants that we're trying to match up so that they do have help to make those groups happen. Like you mentioned, they're smaller. And so even though our hybrid classrooms, you're like, oh, there's only 10 or 11 kids, you really can't, you can have maybe 2 or 3 at your table. And so we still do need some extra support to help make those groups happen. And so that's kind of my big goal moving forward this and after spring break, trying to see if we can get those holes filled. So next slide, please. The key takeaways that from all of this for us is that our team approach was really helpful and that we had done some of this teaming last year because we were able to, we didn't have as much time to have these meetings. And so we had to make some decisions still using our agreed upon rules, but also had to make them fairly quickly in those turnarounds. And I was glad that we scheduled those meetings in at the same time we were scheduling our other necessary meetings that had to happen to come in for hybrid. It was really important to be organized. And because we don't have all teachers in the building, some of our CDL teachers are teaching offsite. Still having shared documents was huge. That also allowed me to share the information with all of the specialists and the interventionists so that we could all be on the same page. And so definitely we were using those more than we had in the past. Before the intervention planning meetings, I felt like it was really important that I had things streamlined. And so I had kind of tentative groups put together, but then I also had some options in there. And that's where the teaming came in, where I already had the plan ready. And I think that was helpful for teachers because they have so much going on in their brain getting ready for hybrid that if we had started just with the list of data, I think it would have been overwhelming. And so just having a little bit of that structure and options helped it go a little smoother, and I think worked really well for our process. And then the other thing I've learned is that it's really important to over communicate. Again, there's just so much new going on that even more than in the past, I made sure to send information like this is what we decided upon, or this is what we're still investigating. I made sure that all of that progress monitoring planning had reminder emails, again, just because teachers are kind of, I don't want to say overwhelmed, but it is overwhelming with the amount of new stuff. And so as much as we could all be on the same page as we were doing this, I think it was good. I also communicated the data I'd gathered each day in the progress monitoring, just so that we had that quick real-time communication and teachers didn't have to take the extra step to go into Easy CBM to look up scores. So I think that over communication helped, again, us kind of transition smoothly in. Really important to be flexible. We had progress monitoring scores that were not expected, like either a student was doing much better than we thought, or a student scored lower than we maybe had thought they were. And so we did have to do some last minute changes. Again, a lot of that communication was emailed through the team. And then that first week back when we started interventions at grade 2, 3, I had 3 new students come in the building that needed to be matched into intervention groups. And luckily we were able to do that, but we just had to be flexible, again, get data right away when they walked in the door, and really find the best fit for them and what they needed. And so we were doing both their progress monitoring for fluency and some phonics placement at kind of at the same time. Again, just trying to get as much information as we could. And then, like I said, we were ready to just jump in, and it was super successful to do progress monitoring on the first day in the building for those 4th and 5th graders. Even though it sometimes kind of feels like it's the beginning of school, they really did come in, ready to learn because they have been doing school this whole time. And so I felt like that worked fine for us to do that on that first day. Next slide, please. So I just put in a few of these charts. And again, this is just how my brain works, and it's not the best fit for everyone. I'll totally admit that. But these are examples of the Google Docs that we shared. Again, it felt like 3 times the work because I had to do planning for the Tuesday, Thursday cohort, the Wednesday, Friday cohort, and the CDL classroom. And that's really, for each grade level, I have those 3 groups set up. That's kind of how we're going to do our comparisons when we come back around to intervention review. We really do have those separate so that we can support all those areas. And so we had a 30-minute intervention block that we built into our master schedule at each grade level. So for the hybrid groups, we kind of knew what the time was going to be. So it was really just matching up students. We did have some places where we had to be a little creative just because of the way the hybrid shook out. There wasn't perfect matches there. But we had some options, and luckily we have a good amount of staff to support these groups. And so for this here, for example, student A and B could have been put together in a group. They're in a similar spot in the Phonics for Reading book, but teachers in our team decision decided that they wanted them to have that one-on-one practice just so they got more opportunities to respond. And so I added those notes after we went through that intervention planning to another column on the right. And then we also, as a team, also talked about the progress monitoring plan. That was also added as another column, but if I put all of that on the slide, you wouldn't be able to see anything because it would be tiny. So we just use this as a working document in that intervention planning, and then I can pretty it up, and it's kind of my schedule reminder of those groups moving forward. We luckily have the whole grade level as a cohort, and so we were able to mix students across classrooms for intervention groups, and that was very helpful when we were able to think things through. All right, next slide. And then this is an example of what our CDL intervention planning looked like. We had to be really creative about times. And that's another area that I'm still working with, is how to support those CDL groups. We've had to be creative about platforms. Some students are having trouble with Zoom, and so Google Meets is working better. We have different grade levels using different things, so we've just had to kind of be creative with that as well. And so for the CDL, I also added a column that has the meeting link for where their intervention is. And so again, we can over communicate. I can share that link with them, but then the teachers can also post it on their Google Classrooms as well. And then we found, because of the challenges in CDL especially, that we have more one-on-one groups. Again, with the lag and things like that in Zoom, sometimes that one-on-one group is more successful than if they're in a bigger group. The biggest challenge for me has been getting kids to attend, especially in grades 4 and 5. It's hard to get them to come to a separate meeting with me. And so I'm trying to get ways to piggyback that closer or on top of their live time with their teacher. But that's definitely one of the bigger struggles we've had with the CDL interventions now that things have switched to hybrid. There's just been a lot of changes in schedules, and families, again, it's hard to add one more meeting on. So that's something we're going to keep working on moving forward. All right, and then my last slide here is on our scheduling. We had to be creative, like I said, especially to support the CDL. Myself and my 2 instructional assistants go back and forth between small group reading and then getting onto our computers to do CDL small group support, and then we go to an intervention group. And so I'm not sure if it's ever going to feel like a flow this year, but we really are trying to fit all of these things in. And so the orange things on the schedule is when we're back on the computer supporting our CDL second and third grade classrooms. The pink is small group support, and then the green is kind of interventions. So the other thing that I was kind of thoughtful about is mixing cohorts in terms of the adults, going through multiple cohorts. For interventions, we are all helping with second and third, but for small group support, I took on most of the second grade, and then one of my instructional assistants is doing all of the third grade classrooms for small group reading. Just to like limit our into cohorts, but also just to limit our brains on having to absorb more information. So she's really able to focus on the small group readers for third grade for that week, and do her best to support them. So simplifying things like that if possible, just because we do have so many changes going on. We've also had to be flexible in that some blocks look different. So for example, I have a large group of fifth graders that needed fluency on Wednesday, Friday. And on Tuesday, Thursday, there was only 3, and all of those were super responsible students. And so they actually meet with me on their off days, and that way I don't need to pull them out of their time with their teachers. And I was able to put a CDL support block in that time. And so we just had to kind of work and be flexible to get that figured out. And then using resources, like I said, I'm using instructional assistants who I normally haven't used for small group reading, and finding blocks that they have in their schedule to support both the CDL classrooms and the in-person classrooms. And the other thing in scheduling is that we left longer transitions. And I just have to say, I'm so glad that we did that, because it just even figuring out which kids are going to walk in the door. It's just that back and forth every day. We kind of just need that minute to breathe and get ready. And then also the extra cleaning that we're doing in between. We've left an extra 5 minutes for that. And so again, different protocols in different buildings, but we're walking kids back and forth more as well. And so that transition has been really huge, that time to make sure that we're ready to go. So those are kind of the lessons that we've learned. Overall, things have been going well. The rhythm, like I said, has been coming, and we are just going to keep checking in with the grade levels after spring break to see how the schedule is going. And then we'll plan our intervention review for mid-April. So then we can have another block towards the end of the year. And that's our experience here at Philomath Elementary.
Thank you so much, Molly. Yeah, take a breath and maybe a drink of water, but that was super helpful. And what struck me is how many of these things that you have set up that I think are going to be useful even in quote unquote normal times, like the way you are communicating with people, the scheduling, it is incredible. And I think those things are probably going to just become part of the practice anyway. So it wasn't, I mean, clearly not a waste of time, but super helpful. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it was great. And would you be open to hearing questions from people if they emailed you? And
For sure. Like I said, this is just our one experience, but I'm very happy to share kind of the format of different ways that we've done things and made it work. So.
All right, thank you so much. And now we have one of our fellow coaches. We have Shelby, who is from Ontario School District over practically in Idaho. So go ahead, Shelby.
Hi guys. Beth, can you see my screen okay? Perfect.
Yep.
So Molly, I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your journey at Philomath Elementary. And so many of the things you said are things that we've experienced too. I also was so appreciative that you said about the shared documents as you were talking. I thought, oh, I want to pop this document into my presentation. So I was able to go onto the Google Drive and pull it off, and the school doesn't even know I did it. So I appreciate that. And thank you very much. And congratulations on having kids back. That's exciting. So our journey through this process it is very similar to what Molly was talking about. went too fast, sorry. The first thing that I really wanted to talk about is where we were at previously. Prior to, March of 2020, things were chugging along so wonderfully when we talked about the intervention review meeting process. So just some highlights and some things that were really working for us prior to about a year ago is really thinking through that lens of providing training to our coaches yearly. So within our district, we have 5 elementary schools, 1 middle school, 1 high school. We have instructional coaches who are fully removed from the classroom setting. 1 per elementary school, 1 at our middle school, and we have 2 at our high school, 1 that covers ELA and 1 that covers math. And so we would engage in yearly trainings around the intervention review placement and meeting process to really just kind of refresh our brains and to also share ideas about how things were going. Some things that really worked for us prior to engaging in the 2021 school year is that from a district level, so I work from a district level. I've been very fortunate to be in all of our schools, and now I work out of our district office. So I would create some supports like having a district-wide calendar that had all of our meeting dates listed on it. So folks knew what was coming up. They knew when those core review meetings were happening. They knew when intervention placement and review meetings were happening. From a district level, I would provide a variety of agendas, all of which were utilized within various Oregon RTI trainings. And then note-taking what happened at each school, just as people became more proficient and they liked different things. As we rolled into, Google Docs, things like that, people would take their own kind of notes. We had a district-wide reading protocol with those approved interventions, so folks knew what were those approved evidence-based programs that we had in the district. We would do an intervention audit yearly, and then just make sure that our interventions were fully stocked when we would start the new school year, so there was never any question about what were those supports out there. And then several years ago, we started engaging in disaggregating data through 3499 funds, and so that would happen at our individual schools. So here's an example of a notes document that folks would use. So in conjunction with the agenda, they would take notes on a document like this, where we were really looking through that lens of what did student data look like, what supports were they receiving, what did those outside supports look like, and then what was our action planning document. And then March of last year hit, and we, went into emergency closure and really just held onto our hats. And then as we got closer and closer and closer to the school year starting this year and realizing we were going to start the school year in comprehensive distance learning and not having students in our building. We were one of the most impacted counties in the state at that point, and we knew that we had to do something. And so as I worked through the process, and then I started talking to the instructional coaches in each building, what they found is that there were value in our processes. People really felt that it was important to engage in that intervention placement process, in those subsequent intervention review meeting processes that needed to continue. We knew that people needed that form of normalcy in their lives. So we backed it way up. We started with how we were going to screen students in a virtual setting. We worked through that piece. And then we had to work through the school-wide schedule piece. And so we started talking about a creation of extension blocks during CDL. What I feel very strongly about as a previous special education teacher is that we can't ask our students who may be struggling to do more than what we would ask all of our other students. And so rather than calling them intervention blocks, we called them extension blocks. And I'll show you an example of that in just a second. But that was an opportunity for all students to extend their learning, whether it was our students who are identified as talented and gifted, our benchmark students, our students who were English language learners, who were identified special ed, or who were identified as needing some additional supports. Everybody got something in the afternoon. So our core instruction would happen in the morning, our extension block would happen in the afternoon. This process also forced us into a refinement of our standard reading protocol. We still had evidence-based programs that we were utilizing. So it was a matter of what is that going to look like? how are we going to train people to do this in a virtual setting? And then how are we going to deliver instruction to our students? So all of those things led up to that initial intervention placement meeting that happened in the fall. Around the same time, subsequently, we were also talking about starting to bring some students back for limited in person. So we created limited in-person decision rules that really looked through that lens of access. And that meant attendance behavior, course performance, and also internet connectivity. And so we utilized those decision rules to really start to dive into that intervention placement opportunity around what did our students need? Was it around connectivity, or was their data indicating that they needed something in the afternoon? So we utilize that process to help make some decisions. And then we also started out in comprehensive distance learning. So all interventions were happening in a virtual setting. And as more students started to come back, very similar to what Molly explained, we had to start kind of going down that continuum of supports and placements. Where were those supports going to happen at? What did that look like? Did we have classes that were having to move into the gym because of square footage? We were utilizing every kind of nook and cranny of our buildings, but also thinking about that support. Were there kids who were being successful in a virtual setting, and maybe they could continue, even though they were in the building, we could still deliver interventions virtually. So lots of decisions that had to be made as we started bringing kids back. Here's an example of one of our school-wide schedules for one of our elementary schools. I just snipped the afternoon section because this was when our interventions happened. And this was very similar amongst all 5 of our elementary schools, is really thinking through what are those federal requirements that we are still obligated to provide around English language development, obviously around special design instruction for students identified special ed, but how could we continue to support extension activities? So you'll see during that enrichment block, things like our approved interventions, but also maybe some book clubs or some small group instruction was happening at that time. This is an example of how we refined our standard reading protocol. We jumped into utilizing a blended curriculum. Historically, we've used Reading Mastery very exclusively for interventions. We've gotten really good data from it, but we also knew that it was very difficult to do that in a virtual setting. Prior to the pandemic, we were starting to explore some blended learning curriculums. And so this is an example of how we're utilizing Imagine Learning, language and literacy within our system, both as a tier 1 support for all kids, and then also as a tier 2, tier 3 support. And so how are kids accessing that curriculum that can happen, as Beth talked about, kind of in that async format, maybe on days where they're not in school, or maybe if a student is experiencing an English language development block, but they're not identified ELD, this is an opportunity for them to jump into Imagine Learning and just continue to improve upon their skills. This is an example of a notes document based off of our LIPI decision rules that were utilized to help teams really start to filter down and look at what did their students need? How are we best going to support them as we started bringing kids back? And then thinking through, after Governor Brown gave the executive order right before Christmas that she wanted kids to start coming back into the building, we worked through that Christmas break, bringing our staff back in January. We engaged in our winter screening, our winter benchmarks in January. And so our core review meetings happened at the end of January, and then immediately our teams rolled into their intervention review meeting. So here's an example of a notes document that happened just this winter. And a couple of things to point out is that in attendance, we had our classroom teachers and a learning specialist and instructional coach and a principal. Those were the people who were in attendance on this February 1 meeting. And the intent behind it was to start to look at how their students were performing who were receiving interventions. Also disaggregating for those students who were in historically marginalized groups, how were they performing and what more did our kids need? This instructional coach for this particular building, she told me that this was the best intervention review meeting they'd ever had. And I asked her why. I said, why was it the best? And she said, because the teachers really owned the data and they really started making those connections between core instruction and what was happening in intervention. And so this is the last slide. Another thing that happened as we started bringing kids back, all of our students came back our K-8 students came back February 10th. And so because we had already created a school-wide schedule for comprehensive distance learning, our instructional coaches, our administrators, our leadership teams took those school-wide schedules and then started to layer on having students in person. What would that look like? So this is the same school I showed you earlier, as now we have the majority of our elementary students who are back. They started to layer on. And so you can see that those enrichment blocks are still happening for kids in the afternoon. So kids' schedules have continued for our students who are still in comprehensive distance learning. Who are still in that virtual environment, they still are aware of when those interventions are happening and what that looks like for them. That didn't change a lot. So we felt that that was really successful. So that is all I have.
Thank you, Shelby. That was all helpful. And again, documents and things that I think are going to be useful going forward as well. So as we looked at how many people are in the group here today, we kind of discovered that it probably doesn't make sense to do breakout rooms, just given that there's a lot of us and the proportion would seem a little wonky. So I'd like to open this up to everyone so that we can all hear. And then the other advantage here is we'd be able to ask Shelby some questions. We can't ask Molly some questions because she, I believe, is teaching an intervention right now. She may, oh, nope, she is there.
10 more minutes and then
okay. So if you have a question for Molly, think quick. But thinking about your own planning that you're doing right now or the situation you are in right now, we would love for you to share one genius solution that you can really celebrate about something that came up that somebody said, how about this? And everyone went, oh my gosh, that's perfect. And that the rest of us could truly benefit from. And then also, what is something that you would like some help problem solving around? What is a dilemma or a challenge that you're just thinking, I don't know how we're going to solve this problem? There's a lot of great minds on this call, especially those of you who are in buildings right now doing this work. So let's kind of come together, and please feel free. You can either literally raise your hand and we'll have people watching for you. You can do the raise the hand icon, or you can just unmute and jump in. So we would love to hear from you about a celebration, a challenge, or a question from one of our presenters. Guess everyone's got it all figured out.
Well, I'll share something from Shelby's actually, that your document that you shared about your student concern list and areas of concern and then the action plan, like as a building, are a lot of our teachers now that they're seeing those kids, they're like, oh my gosh, they need, or I need, and so we're actually, besides our formal ORTIi stuff, we're just seeing other concerns and we're trying to figure out the best systems. And so for me, just that aha of, oh, let's sit down with even the grade level teams and create this. And it can be a variety of areas and just kind of put it all in one place, was just an aha moment for me. So thank you. That was great.
Yeah, I would say that our, because we've had such a huge emphasis on social emotional connections and needs of students, those are things that we've added into our intervention review meeting process. Just general check-ins, like how are our students doing and how are our staff doing? I think that's something that is really important. Our teachers are all simultaneous teaching right now. Molly, I really appreciated how you talked about that you had a separate CDL classroom and then you had your in-person classrooms. Our teachers, our school board opted to have them do simultaneous teaching, and that is really hard. Those of you who are doing that right now, hats off to you. It is very difficult. And so checking in with our staff, but checking in about our students, but also checking with our staff is so important in moving forward.
So this is a question most likely for Shelby, because it looks like in your district or in your school, you were following a program or schedule that has students returning to an online intervention model in the afternoon.
So that's a great question. So our kids are all in the building. What we did is through that continuum of placement and support options that we've created, some kids, I really told folks, what does the data tell you? Were they being successful in a virtual setting? If they were, maybe we can continue to provide that. So in some of our buildings, we have instructors, our instructional assistants, who are, sitting at their little kidney tables with their headsets on, and their music seeing behind them doing reading mastery instruction, and the kids are in their classroom setting with their headphones on, responding to the teacher. And so I just talked about with my staff, going down that continuum. If kids weren't successful in that, how can we tweak and monitor? If they weren't, going all the way to kind of that traditional pullout model, but being very thoughtful and respectful around that cohorting as well. And if we started to see some school spread, making sure that we weren't having multiple cohorts and multiple people in buildings, or in classrooms. The kind of three main interventions we utilize in our district is Imagine Learning, which is a blended learning curriculum. And so kids can access that on a computer. And then there's also, at the same time, as you start to analyze the data, there's also additional lessons that are provided. So first having students receive that computerized instruction, and then pulling small groups of students for that small group instruction. And then as we rolled into our tier 2 and tier 3 supports, identifying reading mastery, corrective reading, the dyslexia toolkit, things like that, around that very specialized instruction. So it was kind of both in the curriculum aspect, Kimberly, but also in that placement of where our folks were at.
So the extension blocks that you were talking about, they're occurring while the students are actually in the building for in-person learning. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, but also because we have about 20% of our overall population who has opted to stay home, those kids, we tried to keep those blocks of time as we moved back into in-person learning the same. So those kids who previously knew their schedule and they knew what they were doing, they still had access to those intervention blocks, and it was still around the same time. So just to support the families. So we weren't completely changing everything once again for them.
So with those students who are continuing CDL and then even prior to returning to in-person learning, did you find any ways to really motivate kids, or that were really highly effective in having kids attend when they were needing to return to one of those extension blocks?
Yeah.
That's one probably our biggest challenges is we do our extension blocks all CDL, the way our district has set it up. And it's just, trying to figure out how do we entice those kids to return to an instructional time when they maybe have been logged off for an hour.
Yeah, we definitely felt that, especially when we were in full CDL in our kids. So our core instruction would happen in the morning, and I didn't show you guys the morning kind of blocks for schools. But then they would usually have like a lunch and a break time, and then they would come into their extension blocks in the afternoon. And we definitely saw that kids wouldn't log back on. And what we felt is just really focusing on that relationship and that communication with families around how can we best support you. And then also engaging in some of our tier 1 PBIS supports as well. I sat in on a small kindergarten reading mastery group not very long ago, and that teacher was just like moving, and they would do instruction, and then they would do fun thing. They would do like this remove the block for a picture thing, and the kids loved it. And then they'd go back to instruction, and then they had virtual sticker charts. And so I think it was just a matter of that relationship piece and a matter of communicating with families. I think now as we are back and we have kids in the building, I'm still hearing that. And one thing I really recommend is that we just sit down with the families and talk through that lens of the importance of having them attend interventions, and that kids in our district have that option to attend in person. So, but definitely, Kimberly, I would say that's a huge challenge we face as well.
Thank you.
That was a great conversation. While that was happening, did anybody come up with another question or celebration that you'd like to share? No, I've gotten lots of good ideas. Thank you.
I just want to celebrate Molly's work with over communicating. I just think that's over intelligent to over communicate. To students, families, staff, I just think that's whatever way we can do that. I think it's critical at this time and moving forward. It's a great practice.
Yeah, I think that's what I like so much about it is I think it's something that's going to continue, and we're looking for those kind of silver linings in all this. And I think some of these new habits are phenomenal. So. All right, Brad, do you want to go ahead with the next part then?
Absolutely, I can take over. So we've kind of already done this. We don't need to debrief anymore because we just did one happy breakout session. So let's take some time and kind of go over our new intervention review agenda toolkit that we have created for you. So let's go ahead and get started. Here's links in the presentation to the overall toolkit. There's a number of items that we've created, and we overhauled our agenda completely here. So it is the main document with links to all the tools and whatnot. And we just like to spend a few moments today just kind of unpacking this new tool and make it your own. Everything that we do create, we encourage you to customize and suit your needs however you need to from those tools. By no means are these the best way or only way to do things. They're just models for you to explore and to make your own. So please go forth and do that. So here's the big features that we kind of want to unpack today with our new intervention review toolkit. Number one, we want to overemphasize this needs to be done as a team. The second thing that we want to keep in mind and have a practice around is looking at disproportionality and have a way to review that as a school and as a team. And then how does that conversation then impact our core review processes and then also our intervention review process as well? And how do we have those conversations at that level, but still do the hard work that we need to do? Also, we want to point out in our intervention review agenda is an equity pause point. You've seen some of those in our core review agenda as well. Each time that we do this work and we have to take some pauses and to ensure that we are making equitable decisions along the way. Another feature that we want to point out with our agenda is our expanded tools and data sets that we encourage teams to use at the table while they're making these decisions. Also, we want to unpack a little bit more the explicit decision-making framework that we are unrolling in our new agenda. And then finally, our plan development has been restructured just a little bit for your needs. So once again, as a team, we can't stress this enough that this process and this work should be done with the team. And part of that is scheduling. We understand that scheduling is a challenge to get all these folks around the table together, but it's critical that we do it, and it's critical that we do it as a team. So when are we going to do this? We're going to do it about every 8 to 10 weeks following initial placement or the last review that we did. The time you're going to need to truly do this is about 45 minutes to an hour. And when you get really good at it, you definitely can stick to about 40 to 45 minutes, but I encourage you to at least schedule an hour for each team to meet when you're first starting these processes. Who should attend? By all means, I think the grade level team, and if you can get support staff, IAs, Your teachers, grade level teachers around the table, that's going to be critical. Your literacy specialists, your administrators, your learning specialists, your ELL specialists, speech pathologists, counselors, whoever you can support teachers, students, families to improve outcomes, I would encourage you to bring around that table. Also, we have a set of data and tools that need to be brought, and in the shared responsibility in those tools making it and this organization actually happening is critical. So assign people different roles as to what they should bring and also the roles that they will perform once they get there. So the big story, use a team, get a team together to do this work. The next thing we want to talk about is having a discussion about disproportionality. And the two big questions that we have to, sorry, I didn't know that was animated, that we have to deal with as a team and as a group are these two questions. Are we disproportionately placing kids into tier 2 supports? And then the second question, after we have students in tier 2 supports, are we disproportionately impacting student progress with those tier 2 supports? So how are we going to look at this? First, disproportionality of placement. So determine how many students, the percent of students each group are showing the need for tier 2 supports at each school and or grade level. And we examine this several times throughout the year and over the course of multiple years. Next, we are also going on to determine the percentage of students who are exited and who do not exit from tier 2 supports if we are seeing a disproportionate impact on progress. So where does this conversation happen? This conversation should truly happen at a school leadership team level. They should manage this disproportionality review. We have built a small tool for you to use. It's called the Tier Support Effectiveness Report, just for you to explore and to unpack with your leadership teams disproportionality of placement and impact of your tiered level of supports, starting with tier 1 and then moving into your tier 2. We then encourage that this conversation trickles down into the other teaming structures like your core review processes and also your intervention placement and review as well. When we do a disproportionality review, we want to look at our demographics of our school. And we really want to truly understand what our population looks like. And we want to understand what the percentage of that population is. For example, in this school, we have 633 total students. We have 300 white students. That makes just over 47% of the population. Our Hispanic and Latino students make up 240 of those 633 students and at 38% of that population. So we need to understand our demographics as we're going through this review and as we are going through these processes. So to understand if we are disproportionately placing kids in tier 2 supports, we want to compare their overall percentage that they make up, percentage of the population, compared to the percentage that they make up of tier 2 supports. For example, that we have here, we have white students that make up 47% of our population, but they make up only 15% of our tier 2 support population. Likewise, our Hispanic Latino population makes up 38% of our total population, but in our tier 2 support population, they are representing 47%. So we have a disproportionality of placement across our school. For student populations below 20, we encourage you just to use tallies and not percentage, and that's alignment with ODE's policies. This example for our students in this population of students are Black students. There's make up only 3%. That's lower than 18 or lower than the number of 20. So we encourage you just to tally and not use percentages when you're talking about student or disproportionality. Next, once we understand that we're having a disproportionality of placement, we also want to ensure that we're having equal or equitable impact on their progress. So are we disproportionately impacting student progress with our tier 2 supports? So what we want to look at is the percentage that we exit students from intervention. So in our previous example, we were talking about the disproportionality of placement. We were disproportionately placing Hispanic and Latino students within our tier 2 supports. Furthermore, by these numbers, we are exiting white students at a percentage of 75%, but we're only exiting a rate of our Hispanic and Latino students at 50%. So this is kind of a problem, and we need to work across our tiers in order to support and fix this problem. But this conversation about overall disproportional placement in equitable impact or disproportional growth needs to impact the conversation in intervention review, but it doesn't exist there solely because it's a problem with tier 1 supports and tier 2 supports holistically. So how do we impact our intervention review? Well, we've built this equity pause point within our agenda. And we encourage teams at this time to pause and to truly remember and collectively reflect on the impact that we're having both with our tier 1 and our tier 2 strategies and practices on all student groups, especially those students groups that have been historically underserved. And as we continue to problem solve our way through our intervention review process, we want to ensure that we have this on our mindsets, that we remember that we are possibly having disproportional placement and disproportional impact on progress. So we highly encourage leaders to, number 1, pause at this point before going on and problem solving with teams, and also reflecting on that tiers of support effectiveness report to understand what level of disproportionality we have. Next, let's take a look at our expanded tools and data in order to do this, in order to make more equitable decisions and the right decisions in our intervention review meetings. On your agenda, you'll see these 2 sections, tools and data. The tools section is hyperlinked or is linked to the tools that we have created for you for this toolkit. Your district should have already district decision rules, and if you still need to review or work on those, please reach out to a coach and we would love to help you with those. Tools that we have created with the toolkit for you, though, we have created an intervention review record sheet. You may have a tool of your own that you record changes and intensifications and adjustments of programs on. What we have included a tool here for you to use if you haven't had one already created. We've also created a problem-solving worksheet for teams to go through the problem-solving cycles and to truly analyze what is going on, to understand what we're going to do and how to develop plans. You should also have district standard reading protocols. And if you have, we don't have those linked here since that's a district developed tool. And if you need support developing that, please reach out to your coach and we can support that as well. We've created also a new core review agenda for CDL, and that's linked here. And then finally, another tool that we have is our tiers of support effectiveness report, which we talked about above, that we encourage that administrators to bring to these meetings so we understand disproportionate placement and impact. Data. We need to have expanded use of data through this process to ensure that we are making equitable decisions at the table. So the first thing that we want is our progress or monitoring graphs displayed. That's absolutely our most important outcome data that we want. And we want it displayed so everybody on the team can be engaged with that process and see what's happening with our students. The next data that we encourage you to have is program assessment data, any diagnostic assessment data, fidelity data, demographic data. Also, we encourage you to have these 2 pieces of data that might be critical in problem solving. That is student and family perception data. If students aren't making progress, are we asking them how are they doing within these groups and truly taking their perceptions in account when we're problem solving? Let's talk about our more explicit decision-making framework that's embedded within our agenda. Here is what the procedures are. So the big question is this: using our progress monitoring data for each intervention group that we've displayed on our board, are all students in this group making adequate progress towards the goal? That's ultimately what we want. We want every single student within that group to make adequate progress. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to analyze and we're going to tally out of the number of groups within that, number of students within that group, how many of them are making adequate progress. And then we're going to analyze if this is a group issue or if it's an individual issue. If all students within that group are making adequate progress, we're going to celebrate. And then what we're going to do is we're going to continue or we're going to exit depending on our decision rules. Are we going to continue this intervention for this group of students, and or are there some students that we're going to exit? But upon that analysis, if we notice that there's 1 or 2 students in the group not making adequate progress, we're going to enter problem solving for either the group and or for the individual. And then we're going to make intensifications and adjustment for the group if the intervention has not worked for most of the students within that group. But if it's working for most of the students within that group, but not some individuals, then we're going to problem solve for the individual. For teams, we have created a problem-solving worksheet to help guide you through the problem-solving steps, and we'll take a look at that in just a few minutes. The last step in this, though, is the critical piece of documenting, recording, and communicating any adjustments and intensifications you've made to the intervention programs. Like Molly was saying, I would over-communicate what we're doing, over-communicate to staff, over-communicate to students and families so everybody understands what we're doing. Here's a look at the problem-solving worksheet that we've created for you that has the simple problem-solving steps of 1, problem identification, are all students in the group making adequate progress? And then it guides you through the step 2 problem analysis for group and/or the individual. And it has another reminder here about our equitable responsibility that as we are problem solving, to keep at the center of what we're doing are disproportionate placement and growth. We encourage teams to take a look at these 4 major domains as they're problem solving for either the individual or for the group. I would highly encourage you to start with your curriculum. If you're not seeing growth with your students and their outcome, start with some of these questions. Is the intervention matched to the student's needs? Is training sufficient to be implemented with fidelity? Is the pacing sufficient and the time within that block sufficient? Are students placed in the correct lesson and so forth? If curriculum is sufficient, think about these areas of instruction. What culturally responsive and relevant instructional strategies and practices are we using or can we leverage from our core instruction that we can bridge and embed within our tier 2 supports as well? Is our instruction explicit with enough opportunity to respond, feedback, enough practice, and also is it delivered at a perky pace? Next, we want teams to look at environment. Is the relationship between the instructor and the students, is that solid? Does it need to be improved? One of the most #1 strategies and practices we can focus on is student and teacher relationship. Is that environment positive? Is it free from distractions? And has there been enough professional learning support in order for that instructor to build an environment for all students to be successful? The final lens that we would love teams to look at is through the learner, but it's through the actions of us, not through the learner. So have we considered leveraging the students' assets and strengths? Have we asked the students' perceptions of the intervention? Have they attended? Are there other barriers to access and or engagement that we have to consider? And last of all, have we partnered with them and have we included with them on goal setting and communicated to them the purpose and the intent of their interventions? Next, let's take a look at plan development restructured, the last piece we want to look at today. So here's the major piece or the thing that the teams need to do. As a team, make any necessary adjustments and intensifications to the intervention program for the group and or individuals. And then we are going to document, record, and communicate. Record adjustments and intensifications on intervention reviewed record sheet or any documentation that you have created as a school. Document phase line on progress monitoring graphs indicating change for group and or individual. Document adjustments and intensifications intervention program on student intervention profiles. And lastly, over communicate intervention plan to student, family, caregiver, and necessary staff. Here is the intervention review record sheet that we have created for you. But like we said, you may adapt or use your own that you've created if you have a one that meets your needs already. But you're welcome to use this one as well. And please let us know if you need further support in implementing any of these tools as we move forward. Here's just once again our link to our ORTIi Intervention Review Toolkit with all those pieces in there, and you can access the agenda at your needs. Okay, now we'd just like to open up for any discussion about our new intervention review agenda and toolkit with these main questions. How can this new agenda and tools support your team in discovering who are your tier 2 supports typically working for? Who are your tier 2 supports typically not working for? And what can we do to mitigate these differences?